I feel very honored. The first picture is, it is in fact the National Museum in Denmark, somewhere in here, but this is the Conservation Department where I work. It's a bit north of Copenhagen. And I've been invited here to talk about on-site storage of archaeological objects from the preventive conservation point of view. And from the moment of exposure, archaeological objects are vulnerable to a range of cultural and natural threats. And to minimize these threats and to prevent damage, several precautions in the field must be taken. And this will be the main issue of my presentation. 20 minutes is not long. This will be a very general presentation of the aspects and also with a rather practical approach. The successful management of the finds from an archaeological site starts in the planning phase. And I will talk a bit about that. And risk identification is really also a part of this planning phase. And by risks, I mean circumstances within the environment or embedded in the material or object that can threaten the future preservation of the find. Then the initial planning phase and risk identification should lead to a strategy for the actual preventive actions and the management on site. And then the post-excavation activities, they are the reason for all our efforts. And I will not say very much about the end use of the objects here, but I have included the issue here on this slide because the potential end use of the objects from the find has an impact on the strategy in the field. First stage of the planning concerns the purpose of the excavation. Are we dealing with a rescue excavation or a research excavation? Because in general, the objectives will set the frames for the available resources for the excavation, as well as the time frame, for example, and also the responsibilities throughout the excavation process. And it's not always very clear who has the responsibility through the entire archaeological excavation and who will provide the necessary resources. But it's very good to have it clear from the start. And also, what kind of finds can we expect from this archaeological excavation? The preservation condition in the area can indicate the potential types of materials that can be found on the site. For example, objects of inorganic materials, such as metals, glass, ceramics, stone, can be present on both wet and dry sites, whereas the organic materials are rarely found in dry conditions. And also, it's a question whether the finds that we excavate will be accessed in the museum, whether they will remain in situ or they will be reburied or discarded. My presentation today will mainly deal with the on-site storage of wet archaeological sites. The reason is not that these objects are more valuable than others, but the wet sites are relatively complicated and they can hold quite a lot of organic materials. And the organic materials can contain quite a lot of information with respect of dating. You can find out the resources and climate and tools. So the wet sites, they require special attention during the excavation because if the proper preventive actions are not taken, irreparable damage to the find can be caused. So what about the risks? I'll talk a bit about the general risks first. Any archaeological excavation leads to a change of the environment causing the survival of the objects. And that is because the temperature, the relative humidity, light, the physical support, and the oxygen level is changed. And these are this environment that has protected the objects until the exposure and is the reason for their survival so far. So the first aspect is to consider that the material degradation starts immediately upon exposure and that the speed of degradation, it will depend upon the material, its condition, and the environment. Also, the fines may exceed the expectations with respect to amount, to materials, dimension, and cultural historical value. And I think the Yenikapi site is a very excellent example of that. And then, again, another risk is lack of resources and time and competences during the archaeological excavation. If you lack these, then you might see that some solutions will not be the optimal, and that again can cause problems with the long-term preservation of the finds. So let's take a short look at the various materials with respect to identification of the risks. I'll start with wood, I will not go into details with all the materials. That will take too long time. But this is a fresh sample of wood, and this is how it looks in the microscope, in the SEM microscope. And the fresh capillaries are strong, and they can withstand the capillary forces from water. This is how wood looks when it's degraded. This is a dry piece, but imagine that this piece this structure was filled with water, and when water evaporates from such structures, the capillaries cannot resist the capillary forces, and the structure collapses. That is the main problem with wood. Another thing is that it looks so good when it's exposed. So a great risk with archaeological wood is in fact overestimation of its condition. It looks perfect upon exposure, but in fact it's heavily degraded. And that's why we see that man is also a great risk to these kinds of objects. Also, as soon as this kind of wood is exposed, it can dry, it collapse, and it can shrink. Also, in particular for wood, in particular larger pieces, the conservation process are long and costly, and that's why the decision-making and fundraising may take a long time, and that represents a risk as well for the preservation of the wood. So, in fact, it's very important that precautions are taken from the start when you deal with wet sites. And then we have the other kinds of organic materials, such as ropes, textiles, leather, and other fibrous materials. These may be very difficult to distinguish from the surrounding materials. Also, the cohesion of the material is lost. So the risks for these kinds of objects may be that they in fact are destroyed during excavation because they are not seen in time. Also, that they are cleaned in the site will represent a problem, because the clay, the mud, the earth in this fiber is in fact stabilizing the structure. And also that they are so disintegrated that they may be destroyed upon rescue from the site. So I will not talk very much about inorganic materials, but just a bit. Beads and glass, for example, they can be very, very fragmented and difficult to work with. And for these kinds of objects, for example, if you have jewelry or things like that, the order of organization is very important and needs to be preserved as well. Then, for example, metal objects and coins, they are very often corroded, and very typical for archaeological artifacts, and in particular coins, the information lays in the surface, and in particular in the corroded surface. So a typical risk for these kinds of objects is, again, that they are cleaned on site. Oh, you want to see what this is, and you try to clean it with your fingers, and suddenly that piece of information is gone. And they may also be destroyed during the excavation and disintegrate upon rescue. So, what is storage on site? Well, in order to meet the risks, the strategy has to manage all actions from the objects are exposed, puts point A here, and until they are transported safely from the site, until a conservation laboratory or whatever the end use will be. And the overall aim is that the time from A to B is as short as possible, and that all processes between the exposure to the transportation are controlled. And it may sound simple, but it can be very challenging. Firstly, there are, of course, the necessary activities that have to be carried out in the field, like the further excavations, documentation, lifting, and packing. But then there are the other circumstances that coming in that are not that easily controlled, like lack of equipment, bad weather, or the press will come and see and they want to take photos, and also the part with the long decision process. And there might be several occurrences like this prolonging the time of the excavation, and one needs to be very aware of to control the preventive precautions throughout all these happenings. And once the damage of the object has occurred, one cannot go back. So we need to take a look at the actual precautions as well. So what will we do? For example, in the wet site with archaeological wood, this is a site where we had thousands and thousands of wet objects, and a simple spraying system can, in fact, keep the water wet during the excavation. But again, it has to be just spraying because the objects must not be swimming. So again, it has to be controlled. If there is not spraying systems available, wet cotton cloths and plastic can be used as well, and they will also protect against sunlight. And you also need to protect against a strong wind and low temperatures, because they can cause risk as well. And if the covers are not secured, they may blow away and destroy the artifacts. Also during the winter time, maybe not in Istanbul, but elsewhere in Turkey, the temperatures below zero can cause serious damage to all kinds of waterlogged materials. So again, avoid uncontrolled exposure during excavation, and also protect against the sun, and never leave the objects unattended during documentation. And an example is the photography of the objects, because the photographer doesn't necessarily know how to cover the objects properly and take care during all the photographing. Also, it's a good rule not to leave fragile objects in the field overnight. They might not be the same in the morning. Then again, how to pick them up. I have a few examples here that I'm very fond of showing that this is not the way, because the very small organic objects, they might be very, very fragile, and if they are packed like this, all fragments may swim away. So what we prefer to do, if feasible, is in fact to seal the objects in a perforated plastic foil. This perforated foil, it provides full support of the object, and it keeps the fragments together, and you can put identification labels within the objects here, and you can seal around the object, so it makes the object easy to handle and easy to sort and store, like here, in boxes. And the packing is transparent, so you always see what you're dealing with. So that's for the small fragmented pieces. Well, this cannot be done with a heavy and large object, and that also represents a special challenge. That's the very heavy objects, because they are also degraded in the surface, and they also contain very important information in the surface. On these objects, we have in fact used eyebolts that have been inserted in the object. And it may look very drastic, but one thing to consider when dealing with very large structure is that the decision process is very long, and during these processes, these timbers will have to be lifted and moved several times. So in fact, it's a very good precaution to insert the eyebolts from the start and use them for lifting every time. Also, rescue from marine environments require special equipment, and these planks are relatively well preserved, but still they are lifted with bars under the planks. And the thing with in particular heavy objects is that one have always to think one step or two steps ahead of what is going to happen next time, because you cannot necessarily reuse those the supporting planks. You need to have extra sets or things to put underneath, so you always are able to move it. So thinking ahead is a very good ability to have when you're dealing with such excavations. I will not talk very much about lifting other ship timbers, because I think Professor Yusuf Kochabas will show something about that in his presentation. And I think the methods he applied has been the best I ever saw. And that will be the next presentation. And then we just go back to some of the smaller objects again, the fragile find, the clusters of finds. Packing for storage and transport can be done in the surrounding clay or sand or peat. And one very good thing about it is that this maintains the environmental conditions around the object. And very often it's good to continue the excavation in the conservation laboratory, where you can control all that happens. After lifting and packing, sometimes you will always need to prepare for transport away from the site. And I've learned over the years that you need to pack in a way that is very obvious, but not too much. In an excavation, the people will come, they want to see the objects, you have to take them out, show them again, and still they have to be packed stable. But they are in transit, so whatever you do, you need to be able to stack them. Let's see here. And pack them and mark them clearly with the types of materials and where to go and the destination. And also remember that the one who receives the objects and will pack them out is not necessarily the same person who packed them on the archaeological site. Large objects cannot always be stored in boxes, but have to be packed for individual handling after on-site storage, for example, in water tanks like here. The main principles in this situation are that they must not damage each other during storage or lose fragment while on storage or during handling. Also, the tanks should not be too full. Like you see here, they improvised quite a lot, and it could be good, but still it's too full, and they're really lying on top of each other and weighing each other down. It's really, I'm not really happy with that solution. And also sometimes you end up with long-term storage in larger tanks, and it's important that they are kept closed and as cold as possible. And coming to that part, high temperatures accelerates the degradation processes. So a very useful device in warm summer climates is a refrigerator. That's not always available, I know that. But a cooling container can in fact be used as well. They are available in different dimensions, and they can, if there is electricity available, they can be moved by lorries and put on excavation sites and stay there throughout the season. And if the objects are strapped in a good way in the container, in the cooling container, the objects can be moved from the site to a conservation laboratory after the excavation project has finished. The storage in cold condition does not apply for the objects that are inorganic or found in very dry conditions. Then it's better to apply insulating materials. Altogether, it's a good principle that storage period should be as short as possible. Also, that one tries to maintain the preserving climate condition by keeping wet objects wet, dry objects should be kept dry, and the humid objects humid, and try to avoid too large changes in temperature if possible. Also minimize cleaning and documentation on the site, and avoid the use of chemicals, because these can destroy the analysis after excavation. Also, of course, avoid light and extreme temperatures, and avoid long-term storage or long-term packing with materials that can cause microbiological degradation, like packing on wood might cause problems later on. Packing with cotton can cause problems. So those materials should only be used on a very short-term basis. And aim for simple packing solutions. As I said, it's not necessarily the same person who will open the packages later on as the one who packed them. And prepare for the unexpected. I mean, that's the nature of the archaeological excavations. You don't really know what to find. You can have some expectations, but there will always be surprises. So the ability to improvise is really important. And so let's go to the planning. Some conclusive remarks on this. In order to manage the successful on-site storage, good planning is really necessary. And although some things can be improvised, it's important to be aware of all the risks, the potential damages, and the resources required, and to have a plan for it. When it comes to the actual precautions in the field, this will of course require certain materials and instruments. But the inclusion of professionals with the knowledge and experience is a very good investment here, because they will know how to take the necessary safety measures and create good solutions. Also, archaeological excavations are indeed teamwork projects, and therefore communication of the risks and the required actions must be communicated to all participants in the excavation, so everyone in the excavation knows that these precautions are necessary to have a successful result. Sometimes the end use of the objects after excavation is not decided from the start. However, the preventive measures taken in the field will allow future investment, will allow future use of the objects coming from the excavation, whether they will be on display or they will be used for research. So in any case, preventive conservation in the field is an investment in the successful future interpretation, display, and survival of the archaeological finds. Also, less damage of the objects will occur, and this will reduce the conservation costs and altogether bring better results from the excavation. And I guess that was it. Thank you.